Hello everybody, welcome into another lesson. So a lot of you have probably seen this lesson already. I am reteaching some of these because I'm working off an old computer until I get a new computer, and I've been having audio and visual issues. I'm hoping this will take, but I want everything to be right, so everyone that watches these videos in the future will actually have accurate audio and visual, as opposed to it being messed up, because you guys deserve the best. You absolutely deserve the best from me, and that's how I want it to be. I don't want there to be audio and visual issues to where you can't learn from what I'm trying to teach, because that's a strong disservice to you. So today we are talking about prisms. Now, a prism can come in all shapes and sizes, different types of bases. A prism will always have two bases. Next lesson we'll talk about pyramids, which only has one base, but prisms always have two bases. You can have a rectangular prism where the bases are rectangles. You could have a triangular prism where the bases are triangles. You can even have a trapezoidal prism where the bases are trapezoids. You can have other types of shapes like hexagonal prisms, you name it. But in every prism, of course, you have two bases. The other sides that make up the prism, and in particular, we're going to be talking about right prisms. There is another type of prism we'll talk about in a minute, but right prisms, the lateral faces they're called. So you have your bases and your faces. Two bases, and then you can count the number of faces you're going to have by how many sides a base has. So in a rectangular or trapezoidal prism, right? A trapezoid and a rectangle both have four sides. Well, you're going to have four faces that connect one base to another. And in a right prism, which is what we're going to be working with exclusively, they're what's called lateral faces are always rectangles, which make life a lot simpler. If you had a triangular prism, you would have three lateral faces, which would also be rectangles. Now, another type of prism called oblique prisms, that's where your lateral faces are just parallelograms but not rectangles. What separates a right prism from an oblique prism is the fact that the altitude is actually an edge of a prism where it actually connects one base to another directly. It's an altitude and it's an edge of the prism at the same time, where in an oblique prism, an edge of the prism is not an altitude, it actually lies outside the prism. And oblique prisms are a little harder to work with for that reason, so we're not going to be really dealing with oblique prisms. So we're only dealing with right prisms, but I've already mentioned bases and lateral faces. And then of course, for the base, especially in a rectangular, you have your length of the rectangular base, you have the width, like you classically would for a rectangle, and then you have the height of the prism itself. Now, if you get into triangular or trapezoidal prisms, you have here what's called, these sides are called the lateral edges. Well, in a rectangular prism, the height is also a lateral edge. But as you know, in a triangular prism, the height of the triangle is the altitude of the triangle and not one of the edges. Same with a trapezoid. It's going to be the altitude of the trapezoid, not, to find the area of the trapezoid, not the lateral edges. So we'll get into more of that in a minute, but we have three types of things we're trying to find with prisms. One is called the lateral area. Well, what is the lateral area? The lateral area is the area of your faces, not including the bases. So in a rectangular prism, you would define the lateral area. You're going to exclude the area of the two bases of the rectangles. You'll find the area of the region around it. The lateral area can be found by taking the perimeter of a base and multiplying it by the height of the prism. If that makes sense, because the perimeter, of course, is just the distance around, while the lateral area is kind of like the 3D version of the perimeter. It's the distance around the prism without the bases itself, but it's the perimeter of a base times the height of the whole prism. Now, once you know the lateral area, you can find what's called the surface area. Some books refer to it as the total area of the prism, the same thing. So lateral area is abbreviated LA, surface area is SA. To find the surface area, it's the lateral area of the prism plus twice the area of one of the bases. Because a prism has two bases, that's why it's twice the area of one base. Capital B stands for the area of the base. Usually, if you're working with lowercase letters, that just denotes a length. If you have uppercase letters, that denotes an area of something. So the surface area of a prism is the lateral area plus twice the area of one of the bases. So lateral and surface area make up the coverage of the outside of the prism. So let's say you want to paint a house or something like that. You're going to go based on the surface area or the lateral area. More accurately, probably the lateral area, because you're probably not going to paint the roof. Who paints a roof? I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that do that, but anyway, you're going to cover the outside of your house with paint. And then we have the volume, which is the area of a base times the height of the prism. The volume of a prism is the total capacity of what the prism can hold. Like if you're trying to fill a swimming pool, you're going to go based on volume for water. Or if you're trying to fill cement, you're trying to mix concrete and fill cement, that's going to largely be volume based. So if you paint a house, you're not going for volume. You're not going to fill your house up with paint. I mean, I don't know who the heck would do that. I'm sure there's someone out there that would, but it's a strange world we live in. But anyway, the volume of a prism is the area of a base times the height. So we're going to do some exercises here. We're going to start out with rectangular prisms. And I know in the last lesson we talked about cubes, which are the easiest type of prism, where you just have 6 square faces, which you could also call bases since they're all the exact same. But we're going to do a few here with a rectangular prism. Okay. Let's just come on over here. Let me draw a nice little prism. All right. So let's see, what are we given? For the first one, we are given that the length of a base, which this would be your length, this would be your width, this would be the height of the prism, okay? The length is 6, we'll say 6 centimeters, all right? There's a point I want to illustrate with the units. The width is equal to 4 centimeters. And then the height is equal to 2 centimeters. So what we need to find are the lateral area, the surface area, and the volume of this prism. So we're talking about, with the length and width, you have the base being a rectangle, right? And then you have the height of the whole prism, which is 2 centimeters. Well, what is the formula for the lateral area of a prism? The lateral area, of course, is equal to the perimeter of a base times the height of the whole prism. So let's go from there and find the lateral area. Now, if you have a length of what? 6 centimeters, right? You have a width of 4 centimeters. If your base is a rectangle, what is true for rectangles? That opposite sides are congruent. So to find the perimeter of your base, your 6 centimeters, your length is actually going to occur twice, right? You'll have 2 times 6 centimeters because opposite sides are congruent. And then your width also occurs twice. Those are congruent. You would have plus 2 times 4 centimeters, which is going to give you 12 centimeters plus 8 centimeters. So now your perimeter of the base, being a rectangle, would be 20 centimeters. That's the distance around the base of your rectangle, 20 centimeters. Now that we know the perimeter and we know the height to be 2 centimeters, we can actually find the lateral area of the prism. The lateral area is going to equal that perimeter of 20 centimeters times the height of the prism, which is 2 centimeters. Well, what's 20 times 2? That's 40. And then centimeters times centimeters is centimeters squared. The lateral area of this prism would in fact be 40 square centimeters. And if we remember, when we were working in the 2D geometry unit and plane figures, perimeters are always in linear units to the first power because it's just the distance around. You just add up the length of all the sides. But areas, whether it's the lateral area or the surface area, are always in square units. So the lateral area is 40 square centimeters. Now that we know the lateral area, we can find the surface area. But first, before we find the surface area, we need to know the area of the base, because the surface area of the prism is equal to the lateral area plus 2 times the area of a base. It's the total coverage of the prism. Well, what is the area of a base being a rectangle? The area of the base, of course, is length times width, right? That's the area of a rectangle. Well, what is your length? That is 6 centimeters times a width of 4 centimeters. So that would give you your area of the base being 24 square centimeters. So we have the area of the base. Now we can just plug this in for our surface area. Surface area, of course, is going to equal your lateral area, which was 40 square centimeters, plus 2 times the area of the base, which would be 2 times 24 square centimeters, which would give you 40 square centimeters plus 48 square centimeters, giving you a total surface area of 88 square centimeters for this prism. So the surface area of this particular rectangular prism is 88 square centimeters. So we found the lateral area, we found the surface area. All that's left to do is find the volume. The volume of a prism, of course, is equal to the area of the base times the height of the whole prism. Well, what is the area of the base? That was deemed to be 24 square centimeters, right? times what is the height of the prism. That's 2 centimeters. So you'll get a volume of, what's 24 times 2? That's 48. And then centimeters squared times centimeters, that's cubic centimeters. So the volume of this prism would be 48 cubic centimeters. So volume is always measured in cubic units. So you got a lateral area for the prism of 40 square centimeters, a surface area of 88 square centimeters, and then a volume of 48 cubic centimeters. And I got some more examples here. All right. What is the next one here? We have big one here. We have a length of, we'll say 50 inches. A width of 30 inches. And then we have a height for the prism of 15 inches. So once again, we need to find the lateral area, the surface area, and the volume of the prism. So let's go ahead, start out here with the length of this, the base being 50 inches. The width is 30 inches. The height of the prism is 15 inches. Well, to find the lateral area, once again, the lateral area of the prism, of course, is equal to a perimeter of the base times the height of the prism. Well, we know the height, but we don't know the perimeter yet. We definitely need to find the perimeter of the base. The perimeter of the base, well, again, this base is a rectangle. That means opposite sides are congruent to each other, so the length is going to occur twice. So to find the perimeter, you'll take 2 times that length of 50 inches plus 2 times the width of 30 inches. Which would 2 times 50 would give you 100 inches. Plus 2 times 30, that would give you 60 inches. So your perimeter of the base of the rectangle would be 160 inches. So now we do know the perimeter being 160 inches. So now we can actually find the lateral area. The lateral area, of course, is equal to that perimeter of 160 inches times the height of 15 inches. So now we can take 160 times 15, which is going to be a real fun number, I guarantee it. $2,400. So the lateral area of this particular prism would be 2,400 square inches. So we found our lateral area of 2,400 square inches. Now, we know the lateral area, we can almost proceed to finding the surface area, which would be the total coverage of the prism. The surface area of a prism, of course, is the lateral area plus twice the area of the base. Well, hang on a second. What's the area of the base? That we don't know just yet. The area of the base, since it's a rectangle, of course, is equal to the length times the width, which means the area of the base is equal to that length of 50 inches times the width of 30 inches. Well, what is 50 times 30? That's going to be 1500. And then inches times inches is square inches. So the area of the base is 1500 square inches. Now we can go ahead and find the surface area, because the lateral area is what? 2400 square inches plus 2 times the area of the base, which was 1500 square inches, which would give you 2400 square inches plus 3000 square inches, which means your surface area would be 5400 square inches. So the surface area of this prism would be 5400 square inches. So we found the lateral area, we found the surface area. Now we need to find the volume. The volume, of course, is equal to the area of the base times the height of the prism, right? Okay. Well, what is the area of the base? That was 1500 square inches. That's going to be times your height of the prism, which was 15 inches. So now we just plug these in here. So let's take 1500 times 15. That would give you 22,500 cubic inches. So the volume of this particular prism is 22,500 cubic inches. All right. Let's do one more with the rectangular prism, then I'm going to throw some other types of prisms in there. This is going to be a little bit different for this one because we're going to have some variables thrown in. All right. Let's say this time you have a length equal to 5x. You have a width equal to 4x. And you have a height equal to 3x. So they got variables thrown in this time. So the length equals 5x, the width equals 4x, the height is 3x. We still want to find the lateral area, surface area, and volume. Well, once again, what is the lateral area? The lateral area, of course, is equal to the perimeter of the base times the height of the prism. Well, again, your base is a rectangle, so the perimeter, of course, would be equal to 2 times that length of 5x plus 2 times the width of 4x, which would give you 10x plus 8x. So the perimeter of the base would be 18x. So we found the perimeter to be 18x. Now we can find the lateral area since we know the area of the prism. I mean, we know the perimeter of the base, and then we also know the height. So your perimeter is 18x times your height of 3x. 18 times 3 is going to be 54. And it would, since you have x times x, that would actually be x squared. So the lateral area of this prism would be 54x squared units. Now that we know the lateral area, we can almost find the surface area. What is the surface area? Of course, that's equal to your lateral area plus twice the area of the base. Well, we need to find the area of the base, which is a rectangle. Area of the base is length times width, which would equal that length of 5x times your width of 4x, which the area of your base would then be 20x squared units. So the area of the base is 20x squared units. So now you just plug and play for your surface area. So your lateral area was 54x squared units plus 2 times that area of the base, which was 20x squared units. So that would give you 54x squared plus 40x squared, which would simply give you a surface area of 94x squared units. So we have a lateral area of 54x squared units and a surface area of 94x squared units. Okay. Now we found the lateral area and surface area, let's find the volume. The volume, of course, is the area of the base times the height of the prism. Area of the base was equal to 20x squared units times your height of 3x units, which would give you a total volume of 60x cubed units. So the volume of this prism would be 60x cubed units. Alright, so let's go ahead now and move on to some other types of prisms. Alright, what do they give us here? Definitely going to be a triangular type of prism. Alright, so we have a triangular, we have an equilateral triangle where all of your sides are 8. So every side of this equilateral triangle for your base is 8. You have a height of 10 units for the prism itself. So, if you have the height of the prism being 10, you have sides of 8. We first, of course, we want to find the lateral area. Lateral area will be fairly easy. The formula hasn't changed for the lateral area. It's the perimeter of a base times the height of the prism. Well, in this case, the perimeter, we're basing it off the base being a triangle. The triangle, it's an equilateral triangle, so 8 plus 8 plus 8 is 24, right? So the perimeter itself is 8 units times your height of 10 units, giving you a lateral area of 80 square units. So we found the lateral area of the prism to be 80 square units. Well, we can find the surface area and the volume, but here's the thing. We need to find the area of the base first, right? But here's another thing. Your base is a triangle. Your base is going to be a triangle. What does that mean? You need to draw an altitude in order to obtain the proper height of your triangle. If you're dealing with a triangular prism, do yourself a favor and call it the altitude if you're talking about the base. Because if you talk about height, that generally means the height of the whole prism. Where if you're talking about just the base, you want to talk about the altitude. Okay, so you draw your altitude. Now, in an equilateral triangle, remember the altitude splits splits the base into two perfect right triangles if it's an equilateral triangle. Also in an equilateral triangle, what's true? All three angles are 60 degrees. So you have yourself here a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. So the length of this leg here would be 4. You have the hypotenuse 8. What does that mean? That means the length of the altitude would be 4 times the square root of 3. Alright. So we can now find the area of the base. Let's actually do that here. What is the area of a base being a triangle? The area of a triangle, of course, is equal to half the length of the base times the height, which in this case I'm going to say is the altitude, since we're referring to the height of the base triangle itself, not the whole prism. So that would be equal to half of the length of your base of the triangle, which is 8, times your altitude, which would be 4 times the square root of 3. Okay, well, what's half of 8? That's 4. 4 times the square root of 3. The area of your base would be 16 times the square root of 3 square units. Now we can find the surface area. Surface area, of course, is the lateral area plus twice the area of the base, which in this case is going to be 80 square units plus 2 times 16 times the square root of 3. So you would get a surface area of 80 plus 32 times the square root of 3 square units. And sometimes you will have answers like that. If you want a decimal approximation, go for it. You can do that, but you can leave your answer like this. You would have 80 plus 32 times the square root of 3 square units. Now that we know the area of the base, we can find the volume also. Volume again equals area of the base times the height of the prism. The area of the base was determined to be 16 times the square root of 3 square units, then times the height of the prism, which was 10 units. So your volume would be 160 times the square root of 3 cubic units. So that's your volume, 160 times the square root of 3 cubic units. All right. What's next? I'm going to do 2 more, and then we'll be done. This will be another triangle one, but this will be a little bit different. Alright, another triangular prism. So you have an isosceles triangle for your bases, with sides 13, 13, and 10 for your base. So you have an isosceles triangle. The height of the prism itself is 7 units. A little bit different. So, of course, we have your sides for the bases of the triangle being isosceles. You have the height of the prism. Let's proceed to finding the lateral area first. Again, what's the lateral area of a prism in general? That's equal to the perimeter of the base times the height of the prism. So, if your base is a triangle, you just add up all three sides to get your perimeter. So 13 plus 13 is what? 26 plus 10 is 36. So you have a perimeter of 36 units, then times your height of 7 units. So finding the lateral area is just a matter of multiplying 36 by 7. So what is 36 times 7? That's 252. So you'll get a lateral area of 252 square units. Alright, that's one key piece that we need, is a lateral area, 252 square units. Before we have a hope of finding the surface area or the volume, we need the area of the base, though. Now, keep in mind this is an isosceles triangle, so you need to draw yourself another altitude in the triangle, right? Form a right triangle. This will be the altitude. Well, of course, it's isosceles, so that means you're actually going to have two congruent right triangles that the base is split into, because you have the hypotenuse of each congruent and, of course, the leg. By the hypotenuse-leg theorem, these two triangles are congruent to each other, which means it's going to split the base into a length of 5 on each side. So now we can use Pythagorean theorem to find the altitude. So if you take your altitude squared plus 5 squared, set that equal to 13 squared, that's going to be altitude squared plus 25 equals 169, which would give you your altitude squared equals 144. So the altitude of the triangle is 12 units. All right. Now that we know the altitude of the triangle, we have a prayer finding the area of the base. The area of the base, of course, is the triangle, right? So, what is the area of a triangle? It's half the length of the base of the whole triangle times the height of the triangle, which we're calling the altitude, so as not to mix it up with the height of the prism. So that would be equal to half the length of the base, which is 10, times your height, which was 12 units, or the altitude. So half of 10 is what? 5 times 12 is 60. So the area of the base, being a triangle, is going to be 60 square units. Now that we know the area of the base, we can find the surface area. The surface area, of course, is equal to what? The lateral area plus twice the area of the base, which the lateral area was 252 square units, plus twice the area of the base, which is 60 units, which would give you 252 square units plus 120 square units, which means you'll get a surface area for this prism of 372 square units. So the surface area of this triangular prism is 372 square units. And of course we can find the volume of the prism, because that's the area of a base times the height of the prism. The area of the base was deemed to be 60 square units, then times your height of the prism, which is 7 units, So that would give you a total volume of 420 cubic units. So the volume of this prism is 420 cubic units. And I got one more, and this time it's going to be a trapezoidal prism. We're going to talk about a trapezoidal prism. All right. Yes, I want everyone to be able to see different types of prisms and how we would solve for those. Okay, so we have a trapezoidal prism. Let's state what we're given here. We have the first base, length 1 of 4. The second base of the trapezoid is 10. So, okay, we have 4, we have 10. Each leg has a length of 5. And then the height of the prism itself is 20 units. Alright. So we have an isosceles trapezoid for the base, or bases of the prism, where both legs are 5. The length of the top base is 4, length of the bottom base is 10. What we need to do now, of course we're going to start with finding the lateral area of the prism. The lateral area, the formula overall hasn't changed. It's the perimeter of the base times the height of the prism. Well, what is the perimeter of the trapezoid? Just take all your sides, add them up. 10 plus 5 is 15, plus 5 is 20, plus 4 is 24. So the perimeter is 24 units times your height of 20 units. 24 times 20, that's going to be 480. So you get a lateral area of 480 square units for this prism. Now, before we can find the surface area or the volume, we need to know the area of the base, right? What is the area of the base being a trapezoid? It's always equal to half the sum of your two bases times the height of the trapezoid. Well, much like triangles, I'm going to call the height of the trapezoid an altitude so we don't mix it up with the height of the prism, okay? So do yourself a favor, draw an altitude in the base of your trapezoid. We'll actually draw 2 of them because we want to have altitudes. Alright, now it's going to be half of your sum of your two bases times the altitude of the trapezoid. And again, I'm calling it the altitude instead of the height so you don't mix it up with the height of the whole prism. Well, of course we need to ascertain what the altitude of the trapezoid is first. If we notice here, we drew some altitudes, which means this splits it into a rectangle and 2 congruent right triangles. So now, since you have a rectangle, this length is 4, and if you have 2 congruent right triangles, you have 6 between both of these legs of the right triangle. So 10 minus 4 is 6. Divide that by 2. The length of each of these legs of the right triangle is 3. So now to find the altitude of the trapezoid, you're just going to do Pythagorean theorem. So you'll take the altitude squared plus 3 squared, set that equal to 5 squared, which would give you the altitude squared plus 9 equal to 25. So the altitude squared equals 16. That means the altitude of your trapezoid is 4. So the altitude of this trapezoid is 4. Now we can find the area of the base. So the area of the base is equal to 1/2 times what is the first base is 4, plus your second base is 10, times the altitude of the trapezoid, which is also 4, which would give you 1/2 of 14 times 4. What's 1/2 of 14? That's 7 times 4. That means the area of the base, being a trapezoid, is 28 square units. Now that we know the area of the base, we can find the surface area. The surface area, of course, is equal to the lateral area plus 2 times the area of a base, which is equal to 480 square units plus twice 28 square units, which would give you 480 square units plus 56 square units. So that means the surface area of this prism would be 536 square units. So the surface area is 536 square units. Now, last but not least, let's find the volume. The volume, of course, is the area of the base times the height of the prism. Well, what was the area of the base? That is 28 square units times a height of 20 units. 28 times 20, that's 560 cubic units. So the volume of this prism is going to be 560 cubic units. So that's it for prisms. Next lesson we will talk about pyramids. So I hope everyone has a good day. Take care.